So for this video, very exciting because I'm going to be talking with y'all about the best books that I read in the year 2024. And 2024 was a pretty good reading year. Could have been worse, could have been better, but overall, fairly good reading year. And the way that I'm going to structure this video is that I have 8 5-star reads to talk about at the very end. And then I just have a slew of like 4 and 4.5 stars reads to mention to y'all. I do have 24 books to talk about because 2024. But I am going to save those 8 5-star reads for the very end. The rest of this video is going to be kind of just all over the place, out of order. But yeah, that's going to be what I'm talking about, the best books that I read in 2024. So hopefully y'all enjoyed this, and definitely comment down below what were the best books that you read in 2024. Definitely let me know as you're watching if you agree or disagree with any of these picks. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So the first books I'm going to talk about is actually a completed fantasy trilogy that I read of in its entirety in 2024, and that would be the Tamir Triad by Lynn Flewing. And the first book is The Bone Dolls Twin, the second book Hidden Warrior, and the third and final book in the trilogy, The Oracle's Queen. So all of these books I did give 4 stars to, but I think retroactively, if I ever go back and reread this series, I'm going to have an even better time and probably give them anywhere between 4.5 and 5-star reads. One of the most unique fantasy books and series that I've ever read, and honestly, probably one of the best fantasy trilogies that I've ever read. Also, one of the most consistent, because I did give all of these books 4 stars. Sometimes, with stuff like The Bone Shard Daughter, like I love book 1, and then book 2 kind of had a little bit of a falling down, and then book 3 was pretty good. So sometimes trilogies can kind of be all over the place, but this one was just consistently a really good read. And like I said, one of the more unique fantasy worlds and characters and writing styles I've ever read. I definitely highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't checked it out yet. Very good fantasy trilogy. I also read Eyes of the Void by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and this is book 2 in the final Architecture trilogy. And then the first book was also very good, Shards of Earth, but the second book it kind of brought everything home to me about why this sci-fi trilogy could be one of my favorite sci-fi trilogies ever. Sad to say, though, that I'm going to probably have to reread the first 2 books before I eventually read the third book, because I've forgotten a lot of it. But even for having forgot a lot about it, the second book definitely has a lot of memorable stuff in here. I can't get into it because of spoilers, but just some of the best sci-fi I've ever read. Adrian Tchaikovsky is definitely an author that I'm going to hopefully read more of in 2025, because I had big plans of reading a lot of his stuff in 2024, and that did not happen. But this second book, man, just had some really, pun intended, eye-popping stuff. And yeah, this book was just one of the best sci-fi books I read all year. I also read The Last Days of Old Sherikai, and this was a new novella written by Bradley P. Bulio in the Song of Shattered Sands series. And The Last Days of Old Sherikai, this is kind of a fantasy novella that takes place around the times of book 6. So definitely probably one that you would want to read later on in the series. And yeah, this was just really solid. Gave it 4.5 stars. Maybe could give it 5 stars upon a reread. But yeah, just really solid writing and really solid character and plot, like I always get from Bradley P. Bulio. So one of the best fantasy novellas I've ever read. I also read Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulik, and this was definitely one of the best blends of thriller and horror that I've read in quite a long time. Not a perfect book by any means, and it has some problematic elements that a lot of people don't like, but I got along with it pretty well. Really cool characters, and the mystery aspect was pretty intriguing. Overall, I really did enjoy it, and it has some creepy imagery in the book as well. Because you've got like a 5-year-old kid who's drawing these just awful drawings, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. But yeah, really fun book, and I really enjoyed it. I also read the sequel to one of my all-time favorite thrillers, The Housemaid's Secret by... I grabbed the wrong book. That's the first book. Hold on. The Housemaid's Secret by Frida McFadden. Sequel to the book that I just showed y'all, The Housemaid. And while this book was not nearly as good as that book, because this book, kind of the main complaint I have is that it's kind of a carbon copy plot-wise of the first book, but it's still a lot of fun. Great characters and very fun plot. It's just a fun thriller to read. And yeah, I really liked it and gave it 4.5 stars. One of the best fantasy books that I read all year was Priest of Bones by Peter McLean. And this is the first book in the War for the Rose Throne quartet. There's 4 books in this series. I had plans of reading the whole thing in 2024, but I waited too long, and now I'm going to have to reread book 1, which I'm actually planning on doing this month in January. I'm going to reread book 1, and I'm going to have a great time with it because I gave this book 4.5 stars. And then hopefully read book 2 in February, and then finish it off with book 4 in April. And yeah, it's just a really solid start to hopefully a brand new favorite fantasy series for me. That's what I'm trying to say. Another one of my favorite thrillers that I read in 2024, just this past month in December, was The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. And this is actually our Thrill Trailer Kill Book Club pick for December. However, a lot of people did not get along with this as much as I did. I love this book, gave it 4.5 stars. I had heard a lot of people say it got really bonkers. And you kind of get like halfway through and you're like, where's the bonkers stuff? But then it hits and you're like, oh, now I get it. And yeah, this book was just a lot of fun. I had a great time with it. Definitely one of the best thriller debuts I've ever read. And I'm definitely looking forward to checking out new stuff by her. But yeah, one of the best thrillers I've read all year. I also read Brother by Anya Alborn, and this book, y'all, is messed up. This is one of the best horror books that I read all year. I maybe should have gave it 5 stars, but I try to only give 5 stars to books that I absolutely love, wouldn't change anything about, and that I would go back and reread a lot. But this book, y'all, the ending of this book is just so... It's just such a gut punch that I don't think I'm ever going to go back and reread this book. It's basically about this guy who's in this West Virginia family who's out killing people in the woods, and some weird stuff's happening, and he really doesn't want to be a part of it. So he's trying to figure out a way to get out of that family and move on to a new life. And it was a pretty, it's kind of stereotypical, weird backwards West Virginia family in the woods killing people. It's kind of a stereotypical horror trope, surprisingly. And I've watched a lot of movies like that, but this book was interesting because you have a character that kind of doesn't want to live that life anymore and wants to move on. So it was pretty interesting. And really what sold me on this book, because for most of this book, it was kind of just like a 3-star read, but then you get to the ending and you realize what's happened, and oh my God, such a gut punch. And yeah, this will be a book that I remember for a long time, but probably not one that I'm going to want to go back and reread. So for that reason, 4.5 stars, but definitely one of the better horror books that I read all year. Speaking of horror, we have Stephen Graham Jones' newest book, I Was a Teenage Slasher. Had high expectations for this book, and they were pretty well met. And like the title says, you're following a character potentially becoming a slasher person. But yeah, this book, very good, written in first person from this kid's point of view, and yeah, it was just very well told. I think my main, maybe not complaint with the book, but I read this book when it came out, I think earlier on in the year. It's kind of foggy, I don't remember too much about it. It's definitely a book that I want to go back and reread, but it's not higher up on my list because I don't remember a lot about it. But I think if I go back and reread it, it'll definitely turn into one of my favorite Stephen Graham Jones books ever. My Heart is a Chainsaw is really high up there. Night of the Mannequins is really high up there. Only Good Indians. Those books are all very memorable for me. But this one, while it was really good, I just don't remember that much about it. It's very foggy, but still one of the best horror books I read all year. And I've got a few more thrillers to chat about because this year was just a really good year for me reading thrillers personally. Although a lot of these were just so close to getting 5 stars, but they weren't quite on the 5-star level. One of those books was What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall, which I believe, no, not a debut, but this book was just really good with really great care. This book just had a lot going for it. A lot of things that I love about thrillers, because this book had great characters, had really tense moments, it had a really compelling mystery, had a very good ending. I can't really necessarily remember why I didn't give this book 5 stars, but it was just really good. Gave it 4.5 stars, and I'm definitely going to be reading everything this author writes. I recently read her other thriller that came out recently, No One Can Know. Gave that book 4 stars, pretty good. But What Lies in the Woods was just very memorable, and just one of the best thrillers I've read all year. I want to read more by this author. I think she has a new book coming out in February, which I'm going to be checking out. So very excited for that. But yeah, What Lies in the Woods, also a Thrill Chill or Kill book club pick. Really enjoyed it. Another Thrill Chill or Kill book club pick, which we read in May, of course, was Mother May I by Jocelyn Jackson. And this book, I think out of all the 4.5-star reads, was the closest to getting 5 stars, because this book, y'all, was intense. It starts out with a mother having her baby kidnapped, and she's trying to figure out how to possibly get the baby back. And for whatever reason, I love those kind of stories. Stolen baby, I'm on board. But anyway, like I said, this book was just very tense, and this mother was willing to go to extreme lengths to get this baby back. And I want my baby back, baby back. Anyway, this book was really interesting. It kind of weirdly has the climax of the book maybe at like the 70-75% mark. And then there's a lot of falling action, which I thought was an interesting choice. But it still worked out. My main complaint is that like the very ending of the book kind of has a weird... Like, I didn't love the very, very ending of the book. And that kind of is what makes this book not a 5 star. It's maybe like a 4.75, maybe. But yeah, this book, for the most part, was extremely well done with great characters, intense writing, just extremely well done. But yeah, Mother May I was excellent. And then switching it up a little bit with Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I had previously read a few of her books. The Poppy War trilogy is one of my all-time favorite fantasy trilogies. Excellent series. And then I DNF'd one of her other books, Babel or Babel, whatever you want to call it. That one I did not get along with. Yellowface was really good and very different from a lot of the books that I had previously loved this year. Whereas this one, it was kind of a critique on the publishing industry and also kind of a satire. Very funny at times because you've got this author character who's just willing to just be such a hypocrite at times. And God, this book was just really funny, really, really intense at moments. And yet it was just a very entertaining book. And I love when books can just forget about being serious and just be just extremely entertaining. And this book was exceptional. And yeah, definitely a book that I would be willing to go back and reread. And yeah, R.F. Kuang really hit it out of the park with this one. Yellowface, I gave 4.5 stars. And like I mentioned at the start, I gave 8 books 5 stars. But if I were to make a top 10 list, even though these 2 books got 4.5 stars, they were both excellent. So it's kind of a pseudo top 10 here. But I'll go ahead and start out with Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. Definitely one of the best thrillers that I've read all year. And this was the second Alice Feeney book I'd read. I had previously read His and Hers, which I was okay with, but a lot of people loved that book. And then I'd heard a lot of people have mixed opinions about Daisy Darker, but I ended up loving this book. I think it's a book that I could possibly even give 5 stars to if I go back and reread, which normally I don't really go back and reread thrillers a whole lot, but this one, with the twist and the ending, it kind of puts the whole story into a different light, a different perspective. So going back to reread it, I think would be a lot of fun, kind of knowing what's going on the whole time, and it would make me read it a bit differently. So yeah, this one was just very fun, very thrilling, and with great characters and a really good plot. And yeah, it's definitely one of the best thrillers I've read. Highly recommend it. And yeah, if I were doing a top 10, this would probably be at the number 10 spot. And this next book, you might have been wondering, when's Jake going to talk about this book? But I'm going to talk about You Like It Darker by Stephen King, which also just missed the mark of being a 5-star brand new favorite. And it's hard with collections like this because this is kind of a short story / novella collection. A lot of times with collections, you can have like really outstanding stories, and then you can kind of have stories that aren't as quite as good as those really good ones. And this one, for the most part, had really strong stories. Some of the best novellas that Stephen King has ever written, honestly, because a lot of these novellas I gave 5 stars. It was really kind of the shorter, more forgettable short stories that like were fine, but not excellent. Those were what brought this collection down to 4.5 stars. So not a perfect all-time favorite collection from Stephen King, but it's definitely one that I really enjoyed my time with. Some of the best stories that King has ever written still at his old age, which is amazing, and hopefully he continues with that. But yeah, so a couple of the short stories weren't perfect, which brings it down a little bit. So 4.5 stars, but if I were doing a top 10 list, this would come just shy of making the 5-star category and probably at my number 9 spot, if you will. All right, so those were all of the books that I gave either like 4.5 stars, or maybe even like 4.75 stars to, if you will. Books that were just shy of me giving them 5 stars to. But now we're going to transition into kind of my top 8 books of the year. The 8 books that I gave all 5 stars to. Loved all of these books. These are all new favorites. Definitely books that I would consider, well, not even consider. These are books that I'm definitely going to be rereading in the future. And yeah, let's jump right into it. So I guess I'll try to go in like my least favorite to favorite, although all these books are 5 stars. But I'll start at the bottom. Probably if I were ranking them, Stepping Off by Jordan Sonnenblick. This book I gave 5 stars to, obviously. But out of these ones, I guess I'd pick it as my least favorite. It's not my all-time favorite Sonnenblick book, because I've given a lot of Sonnenblick books like 4.5, 5-star reads. It's not quite as good as something like Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie or Notes from the Midnight Driver, but it's still really good. And this one had a bonus of it being narrated by Kirby Hayborn, which, if you know, my all-time favorite narrator, so that definitely helped it out a lot. And also, this one was just a different experience because a lot of his books are definitely more for the younger side and for like middle grade age range. Like they a lot of times have very serious topics, but they definitely have the humor and the middle gradiness that kind of brings it down to a middle grade level. Whereas Stepping Off was definitely him venturing a lot more into the YA genre, which I wasn't sure how I was going to enjoy that, but I really did enjoy it for what it was. And I gave it 5 stars. Definitely one of my all-time favorite Sonnenblick books. Highly recommend it. And yeah, I had a really fun time with this one. The next book I have to talk about is Breaking the Dark by Lisa Jewell. And this one, I love Lisa Jewell. She's one of my all-time favorite authors. I've basically given all of her books either 4.5 or 5 stars. But for this one, it was interesting because she normally writes, mystery thriller books. But this one was the first book in kind of a new Marvel series that's happening. And this was a Jessica Jones book. And I knew basically nothing about Jessica Jones going into this book, although all I knew is she was somehow related to Marvel. And I was just like, why is Lisa Jewell writing this? This makes no sense. What is happening? But I trusted her. I was just like, she's not going to just write a book that she's not going to believe in. So I went into this book kind of with lowered expectations. I was like, maybe I won't absolutely love this book. And when I started out, I was just like, okay, it's good. Like I can see where she's going with it. I'm not like loving it. But by the halfway point, something happened. And then I read the rest of the book and it became a new favorite 5-star read. This book was something else. It's Lisa Jewell writing a Marvel book and it worked. And I gave it 5 stars. And yeah, so I have just complete faith in Lisa Jewell now that she's just going to write amazing books. And yeah, I love this book. Not one of my all-time favorite Lisa Jewell books, mind you, but still a really fun, entertaining book. And I'm also excited to see that I think the sequel to this, or at least a companion book to this, is going to be written by S.A. Cosby, which one of my favorite authors and will appear in this video soon. But yeah, Breaking the Dark by Lisa Jewell, 5-star book, a really interesting read. But yeah, I've loved it. And speaking of S.A. Cosby, he's got a book on here that I gave 5 stars to. And that would be his newest release, All the Sinners Bleed. And yeah, S.A. Cosby is just definitely one of my all-time favorite authors at this point. I've read all of his books, and I think probably my least favorite was My Darkest Prayer, which was still a 4-star read. But all of his other books have been 5 stars. So like Razorblade Tears was 5 stars. My favorite book by him is still Blacktop Wastelands. That book, one of the best books I've ever read. But this one is pretty close. Like this book is just phenomenal. And also, like, to try to summarize why I love S.A. Cosby. His characters are great. His writing style is really great. And I also love that I can get little Easter eggs here and there because all of his books kind of take place in Virginia, which is where I live. So sometimes he'll name streets that I drive on every day, or cities that I've visited, or places that I've been to. So it's fun little Easter eggs here and there for me personally, but that's just a the cherry on top. But really, just his character work, his dialogue is really good. Uh, it's almost like, if Quentin Tarantino were to write books, it would be like this almost. But yeah, his books are just phenomenal. This was his newest one that I think it came out actually in 2023, but I just had never gotten to it. So definitely glad that I finally got to it. But yeah, it's just amazing. And I'm going to continue to read his books because he's amazing. Next book I have to talk about is Middle of the Night by Riley Sager, which obviously I gave 5 stars to. And if I were to, well, I did rank them. I'll link that video down below. I ranked Riley Sager's books. This is probably my second favorite Riley Sager book, just behind The House Across the Lake, which, unpopular opinion, I think I tend to have unpopular opinions about Riley Sager book. This book I think was not as well received as a lot of his other books. A lot of people kind of had mixed opinions on this book, but for me personally, I loved everything about this book, and I had basically no complaints with it. I loved the main character. I loved the premise of this, this kid. He's sleeping in a tent with his best friend, and then he wakes up and his best friend is missing, and the tent is slashed, so he was kind of stolen. And then it's years later, he returns to the hometown, and he's trying to figure out more about this disappearance. It was just really well done. Riley Sager, while I don't love everything he's written, because if you've seen my book that just came out a couple days ago, he's also on my worst, most disappointing books with Final Girls. But this book, Middle of the Night, 5 stars, and it was our, I think, June or July pick for Thrill, Chill, or Kill, and it was my favorite Thrill, Chill, or Kill book we've read all year. Like I said, a lot of people had mixed opinions on it, but I loved it. Definitely one of the best Riley Sager books I've ever read, and yeah, I gave it 5 stars. Oh, I guess also that was my 5th favorite book, so that's top 5. So Middle of the Night is my 5th favorite. Now top 4. Okay, but the next book I have to talk about, I gotta switch books here. They're a little out of order. This was one of my most recent reads, and one that kind of randomly got switched out for Patreon reasons. I'll get it. I'll explain it. But my 4th favorite book of the year is Mary by Nat Cassidy. And this book had an interesting journey because I had been wanting to read this book for a while because I've heard people compare it to Carrie, because it's supposed to be kind of a spiritual sequel, if you will, to Carrie, Mary. It's supposed to be like, what if Carrie was an adult and she grew up and like what her life would look like. That's what I kind of knew this book to be about. And the reason I picked this up in December was because Kate Coy was my Patreon winner for the month of December. She originally chose Nosferatu, which if you've watched my worst and disappointing... no. If you've watched my DNF video, which that hasn't come out yet, so y'all haven't watched that, but it's on there. I DNF'd the crap out of that book, and a lot of us did too. But I let Kate pick another book, and the book that she wanted me to read was Mary by Nat Cassidy. And funny enough, once I told Stacy, my wife, that, she said, I got you that book for Christmas, so here you go. So I got to open this early, and I got to immersion read it. And I had a very fun time with it. Thank you very much. But yeah, I gave this book 5 stars, obviously. And just the writing in this book was really good. The main POV of Mary, very well done. And this book, I love when books can surprise me. Because sometimes if you can even sometimes read a good book, a really good book, but you can kind of tell where it's going, or there's not really like a lot of crazy twists and turns. But this book, it did everything I wanted to do and more. Like this book, I did not really see the direction that this book was going in, and it was really well done. And yeah, I absolutely love this book. I will be reading pretty much all of his stuff. I've already read Nestlings, which I liked a little less, but still really good. But yeah, Mary, chef's kiss. And now we're getting to my top 3 of the year. So these books were like the pinnacle best books I've read all year. And they really shouldn't surprise anyone who's watched my videos for the past year or so. But yeah, number 3, I was thinking maybe this could be my number 1, but I'm going to settle at number 3, Dear Hannah by Zoe Stage. And this is actually the sequel to one of my all-time favorite horror books, Baby Teeth. And if you don't know, I mean, it's not really like a spoiler because it's in the title, but Baby Teeth follows a 7-year-old girl named Hannah who wants to hurt and kill her mom. And you get kind of a dual POV from Hannah and then the mom going back and forth. That book is just so much fun. I love that book. And then years later, because that book came out like 8 years ago or so, it's been one of my favorite horror books for quite a while. But Dear Hannah, Hannah is all grown up now. She's an adult. And just to get her thought processes of how this book was just amazing. This 5 stars, obviously. Be funny if I gave a book in my top 3 like 3 stars. But yeah, Dear Hannah, 5-star read. It was really fun to get her thought processes as an adult, because obviously when you're a kid, you have very different thought processes and very different emotions. It was definitely interesting to see her in a more domestic sense, whereas like she's kind of living a normal adult life, but she kind of still has those kind of thought processes that she did as a kid, but obviously she's got to rein it in a bit more. But of course, it's a horror book and some crazy twisted things happen in this book, so I had a really fun time with it. I think I still enjoy Baby Teeth more, but this book was excellent, and it kind of leads itself into a potential sequel. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, this was definitely one of the best books that I've read all year. My second favorite horror book that I've read all year. So what's number 1? All right, well, that was a little bit of a tease, but number 2, my second favorite book of the year for a long time, basically all year almost, because I read this book very early on in the year. This was my favorite book of the year, and every month I just kept saying that because I hadn't yet found a book to rival this book and to surpass it until December, which you guys probably know what it is. But my number 2 favorite book of the year is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. And this is my favorite horror book. So Dear Hannah was my second. This is my favorite horror book I've read all year, and quite possibly just one of the best horror books I've read in my lifetime. So what to say about this book? It's a very weird, but like it even just has a very just a very weird cover for a very weird and unconventional horror book. Basically, without spoiling too much about this, you follow a woman who's returning to her childhood house where in her past a lot of weird things happened with her dad and just in general. And she's coming back home to her mom, who's not really doing so well. And you're just slowly figuring out how messed up this woman's life has been. And there's creepy stuff happening in the house. And like I've mentioned with previous books, I love when authors take risks, take chances. And this book, there's a reason why this book is so lowly rated on Goodreads. It's because you're either going to love the direction this book goes in, or it's going to fall flat for you. And for me, I absolutely loved it. And I love when authors can, 1, take a risk, take a chance, but then 2, actually land it and do it well. Because sometimes you can take a risk and it might not end up very well. But this book was just so excellent. I loved everything about it. And I'm probably going to reread it next year just because I keep thinking about this book and I want to go back and reread it. But yeah, this book was just amazing. And like I said, for the longest time, this was my favorite book of 2024. But one book came along in December and changed everything. You guys probably already know what it is, but my favorite book of 2024, just coming in right at the end at December, is of course Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because I've already done a very lengthy dedicated review for this book. So you can go check that out if you want to. The first 7 minutes of it are spoiler free. So no spoilers at all for the book and or the series really. And then the rest of the video is just me gushing about this book and how much I loved it. But yeah, it's my favorite book of the year. If you guys don't know, this is the 5th Stormlight Archive book, and it's actually the last book in the first arc of the series. It's going to be a 10-book series with 2 5-book arcs. And this was the kind of the conclusion to the first arc of the story, and I think Sanderson just really nailed it. The ending to this book was just amazing and mind-blowing. It was what I wanted it to be and more. So yeah, definitely hands down the best book I've read all year. This is kind of the only book really that I thought would potentially rival Just Like Home, because like I mentioned, I think I read Just Like Home in February, and just the whole year I'm like there's nothing that I'm reading that's coming close to this. But Wind and Truth's coming out in December, so that could be it. And I'm really glad that Sanderson stuck the landing, and it really solidifies Stormlight Archive as one of my all-time favorite series. And yeah, Wind and Truth, Definitely the best book that I read in 2024. All right, so those are the 24 best books that I read in 2024. Like I said, 8 of these books got 5 stars, and then a slew of these books either got 4 or 4.5 stars, or fairly close to 5-star material. But yeah, overall, I think pretty much I had a great reading year. I had a lot of new favorites, a lot of new authors that I'm definitely going to check out more of in 2025, which is a good thing. I did have some bad books, like I mentioned. My previous video came out a couple days ago, my worst and most disappointing. And then I think next week I'm going to post all the books that I DNF'd in 2024, which, if you want that number, it's 22. So quite a lot. But these were the best books that I read in 2024, and I had a fantastic time reading all of these. Definitely let me know if you agree with any of these picks or if you disagree with me. I want you to chat with me about it in the comments below. Also, what are the best books that you read in 2024? I want to chat about it with you in the comments. So thank you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Continue to subscribe to the Book Astronomer, and go sign up at the Book Astronomer Discord, where we've just got so many buddy reads and read-alongs, it's not even funny. And Patreon page if you want to go support me there for as little as $1 a month, and Amazon wishlist if you want to buy me a book. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.